Oh, hi. So you've just lost somebody close to you, and you're feeling your feelings, and you're sad, and you're grieving, and people are reaching out, offering condolences, saying if there's anything you need, just let them know. And then crickets, like nobody's contacting you. WTF. Welcome to this episode of Hug Me, I'm Insane. My name is Perry Johnson. Today I want to talk about how sadness makes people uncomfortable. And as I was alluding to in my intro, those of you that have lost somebody close to you may have had that experience of having friends seemingly drop off the face of the earth. It almost feels like people start ghosting you. And it's not limited to just friends. Sometimes this can occur with family members. People initially will reach out in your family and then nothing. Or even more puzzling, not reach out at all. Even after the news of your loss is announced, you hear nothing. And that one in particular was really strange for me. So when I lost my son in a highway accident a few years ago, there was a lot of people that reached out to me, which is exactly what I needed. Because being thrown into a situation where all of a sudden your kid is gone is, how do I put this? It threw me off my center in a way that I never imagined could be possible. I've faced hardship and tragedy in my life, and I've lost a lot of people, but this particular situation really messed me up. And so I was grateful to have the support of people who were just making themselves present to me, who were reaching out, offering sympathy, all of that stuff. And many of them would say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And the fact is that there's nothing that you can say. 1 minute your life is one way, and suddenly it's a very different way. And it's a different way in a way that can never be like it was before. Everything changes. Everything changes. It's almost like entering a different reality, a different dimension. And it's in those places where, like I say, my center is thrown off so completely that it's nice to have people step up and stand with me. And that's really all that anybody has to do. That's all that I ever do when I offer my support to somebody who's experiencing loss. Having been through a great deal of loss myself, what I say to people is, I can't fix this for you, but I will stand with you. I won't tell them that I don't know what to say, and I definitely don't try to fix it with some kind of metaphorical feel-good phrase of some kind, because all I'm doing then is attempting to make myself feel better, because their grief makes me uncomfortable and triggers me into my own feelings. And that's really the crux of what it is that I want to talk about today. It's the idea that your grief will make the people in your life uncomfortable. And depending on where those people are at emotionally in their lives, depending on their emotional EQ, to put it one way, they will deal with that in a more present, mindful way that's about you and not about them, or it will throw them into feelings that they don't understand and that make them uncomfortable. And for many people, being thrown into uncomfortable feelings triggers their fight, flight, or freeze. And for a lot of people, they're just silent. Most likely they're going over and over in their heads what it is that they can say to make this situation better, to try and fix this situation, which is unfixable. And there is no way to feel better. It just feels shitty. It's sad. It's tragic in some cases. Sometimes it's natural. Sometimes it's just natural end of life, like losing a parent or something like that, or a grandparent, or somebody that's been terminally ill, that's been suffering. Sometimes it can actually, in those cases, be a release. But in my case, that situation, losing a child, pushed people into some very, very uncomfortable feelings. And so I want to talk about a couple of things that go on with people when they're put in those situations as a way of explaining why you may have experienced in your own grief people abandoning you or ghosting you. So the first aspect to this that I think is important to understand is the idea of projection. And by projection, I mean my loss is going to trigger you into feelings that bring up tremendous fear. And that fear can be interpreted by our minds as being the possibility of themselves or that person also being put into that situation. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but it's sort of that, what if that were to happen to me scenario. And that feeling can make people so uncomfortable that they just don't know how to deal with it. And so they don't deal with it. They just shut it down and push it away. They're literally projecting your situation onto themselves. And this comes back to that idea of knowing the self and understanding what's going on with us emotionally and being able to navigate the feelings that we're having and recognizing those feelings so that we're able to name specifically what we're being pushed into as a way of understanding and not hypothesizing sort of free form in that fear-based way, which is what our head will do if we're left to navigate that unconsciously. So, in other words, if I understand that your loss is pushing me into my own grief, and the reason why I'm feeling so desperately sad is because I've been triggered by your loss, well, that puts me in choice whether or not to deal with whatever it is that I'm feeling in a healthy way or to try and deal with it in a less than healthy way by subjugating it or trying to circumvent it or deny it or whatever it is, change it in some way, maybe, eat our feelings or drink or use or whatever. And so a recent example also of my own of being triggered into a grief was a couple of months ago. I was watching an episode of Drive to Survive on Netflix, which is the Formula One series. And in this season, Romain Grosjean had gone into a barrier and his car broke in half and the gas tank ruptured and he was trapped in his car with a burning ball of racing fuel burning all around him. And there was something like 2.5 minutes or 2 minutes, 20 seconds or something like that of him sitting in that car before they were able to get him out. And he survived, but there was this footage of him finally emerging, and they were talking about all the feelings that were going on in the different pit crews and the different teams and the drivers and the pit bosses and mechanics and everybody else who's fearing and expecting the worst as they're showing this footage of this fireball. And my son, when he died after this head-on collision with a semi, the vehicle that he was in erupted into a fireball. Nobody could go near it. And so Obviously, this was extremely triggering for me. And I was sitting here watching this show, which I was really enjoying, and all of a sudden I'm bawling. It was important for me in that moment to do a couple of things. Number one, validate the fact that I got kicked into grief. And also, number two, like I always say, I didn't do it right in that very moment, but that evening, got on the phone with somebody, a few people actually, and talked about the experience so that it didn't own me, and so that I gave it credence, and so that I allowed what had happened to normalize. Now, many people don't do that. In fact, the majority of us, sadly, are not taught to go in and understand, never mind give credence to or respect our feelings, but we don't even most of the time understand our feelings. I mean, some of the base ones that we do, like, oh, I got angry, or I'm feeling sad. But for many of us, when we feel uncomfortable, we immediately seek to mask it or change the channel on that feeling. What I've been taught is that emotional energy wants to be seen, and it wants to be felt, and it needs to be validated in order for it to be processed in a healthy way. And I can either do that in a healthy way, or I can, like I say, stuff it or whatever, and eventually much of that energy builds up and it will release in other unhealthy ways. We either will have outbursts, or the energy doesn't get dissipated and the body takes the brunt of it, and all of a sudden now we have some kind of chronic illness. For many people who experience mystery body pain, that is a direct result of unresolved emotional energy. And this is well documented. I know that for myself, I had years and years of lower back pain, and that's associated emotionally with not feeling like you have the capacity of supporting yourself. My mindset for much of my adult life was a product of being told that there's something wrong with me through many channels and many avenues when I was young. And so as a result, I was highly codependent. I was a serial dater. I didn't think that I could look after myself. I always needed to be in relationship in order to seek validation, which never came, because it's an impossible task to love me in the way that I'm supposed to love myself. And so one of the ways that I do love myself today is to respect and to validate what it is that I'm feeling. One of the great teachers of this is the grieving process. You don't have a choice when you lose somebody close to you. You're going to have to feel sadness, whether you like it or not, or whether or not you want to admit that it's happening, or whether or not you feel that you've dealt with it and just moved on. Well, a lot of the times it's not that simple and it's not that straightforward. And so I think in understanding that many people are operating in this way, it can really help those of us who are grieving and are receiving the silent treatment, which can be very off-putting and frustrating and puzzling and kick us into abandonment, but it actually has nothing to do with us. And more than likely that person themselves is in turmoil about how they can interface with this situation that their friend or their loved one is in that makes them feel so uncomfortable. And the only way that they can do it is to ignore it and take inaction. The other aspect to this is an evolutionary one. And by that I mean sadness is perceived as a lower energy state. Somebody who is up and energetic and bright and ready to go and happy, from an evolutionary standpoint, that person is going to be much better suited to survive the day than somebody who is low energy and sad and depressed. If you consider how we lived in tribes and survival was a day-to-day existence, you're going to want to have the up, energetic person in your tribe on your team, not the sad, depressed, mopey person. And unfortunately, that paradigm still plays out today when we consider interfacing with either sad or happy people. The reason, or another reason why sadness makes us uncomfortable, is it triggers us into that very primordial fear. So there's multiple levels to this situation. And in understanding these things about the grieving process and how it affects the people around us, hopefully we can come to a better understanding of why people are behaving the way that they are, or why they're not behaving the way that we think they should be. Because again, it doesn't have anything to do with us. We're just the conduit for somebody else's experience. And that's a very, as I've said many times, uncomfortable experience. And they don't know how to handle it. So I'm going to end with this thought. I'd like you to consider that if you're harboring resentment against somebody that you feel should have been more present in your life, in comforting you in your grief, I'd like to invite you to consider forgiving that person or those people. Because I can almost guarantee you, that what you think is happening with them and what is actually happening with them are two very different things. Consider forgiving those people and allowing them their journey that your grief has brought them on. I remember I was reading Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsh. Somebody had given me the last book in that series, which was all about death. And I just finished reading the chapter on how no death is wasted. When I received news that my son had been killed. And so immediately I understood that his passing was by design and that he was only supposed to be here on this planet for 15 years. And one of the many, many gifts that have come from his passing has been my understanding, a deepening of my understanding of my emotional landscape and the ripple effect that his death had on so many people in my life. And for those people that were unable to communicate with me, the divine was offering them the opportunity to deepen their relationship with their emotional landscape. And sometimes they were up to that task and sometimes they weren't ready. And so I was witnessing or experiencing the net effect of where they were at that time. And so in understanding that, I was able to remove myself from the idea of what I thought should be happening and instead bring me back to myself. What is it that I'm not seeing in this situation? And is this story that I'm telling myself around their behavior or their lack of behavior true? And having spoken to a few people who have since come to me and expressed their regret and their guilt at not reaching out at that time, that brought me to an understanding that it's not all about me. And so I'm going to leave it there, and until the next time, see you soon.